Thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's very nice to have you. This is Gunnveig Grødeland, who is the research group leader of vaccine development at OUS. As you know, we've asked from the Norway chapter of Women in Global Health to interview you for this series that we have on reflections on COVID-19 across Norway. So I think we have an interesting discussion today. I think you're going to bring a well-versed and important perspective to the different reflections that we're bringing together on all of this. So I want to start out with giving everybody a bit of a history of who you are, what you work with, and what led you into the work that you're doing today.
Yes, there are many starting points for where we end up.
Yeah.
But I think one of them for me was in 1994-95. I was an exchange student upstate New York. You can't really hear that from my English anymore, but anyway. When I was there, I read the book called The Hot Zone, which is a popularized scientific book about the Ebola outbreak. And I thought this was super cool. So I read everything that I could on viruses. And then it kind of always was in the back of my mind, but I couldn't quite figure out how you could turn into a virologist in Norway. Mm-hmm. So I actually started studying chemistry and kind of forgot about viruses. And then when I had studied that 1 or 2 years, I thought, this is kind of silly because what I actually care about are viruses. And not necessarily how the virus itself works, but how we respond to it. And so I started studying molecular biology and then did my PhD in immunology. And viruses are becoming more and more interesting, but also how our immune system will respond to them, because there's so much that we don't know about this still.
Yeah.
So it's an area that half of the time you have to say, yeah, we don't know that. We think maybe it's something like that, but yeah, there's still a lot to learn. So that's really exciting. And then a focus for my PhD was vaccine development against the pandemic influenza. And since then, I have been working on pandemic vaccines. And of course, that became quite relevant when the corona pandemic broke out last year. So yeah, here I am today.
Absolutely. So before we know which question that we're going to next, but now I have an adjunct question that I want to add in, which is about pandemic preparedness. I mean, there's been discussions for many years ongoing that each of our countries needs to develop strategies for pandemic preparedness. How well do you think we had done that in Norway prior to this, and how do you think that we will do the next pandemic?
I think we had a good starting point, but I think for pandemics, what we have to remember is that what we have to prepare for is the unknown.
Yeah.
Every single time. As I said, I worked with influenza viruses because we thought that would be the next pandemic. You have these bird flus that are on occasion transmitted from birds to humans in Asia. And we thought that it would be quite likely that one of those would acquire the ability to transmit between humans. That hasn't happened yet. It still may. But instead we got the corona. So it kind of illustrates that it's difficult to predict the future. And even if we could maybe predict to some extent which virus would hit us, it's even more difficult to predict how we would respond to it and how it would move in society.
Yeah.
And I think I would then have to also say that, the WHO has a global program where they are doing surveillance of all the viruses that are moving in humans and birds and animals. Well, not all, but a lot of them.
Yeah.
And they are making lists as to which viruses are more likely to represent the next pandemic threat.
Right.
The coronavirus was not on that list, but it was discussed to be on the top 10 list. So it was actually discussed as the top 15, not the top 15, nor the top 10.
Yeah, okay.
It was discussed, but not really expected to this extent.
To this extent. How long ago was that?
That was in 2019.
That was 2019. Wow.
Yeah.
Pretty accurate.
Pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of these viruses on that list is virus X.
Okay.
Which is the virus that we have never met before and have no idea how to protect ourselves against, and we have no idea what it's going to be. That's what we have to prepare for.
Well, so then segueing into that, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this pandemic preparedness, but in terms of the COVID framework that we've now been dealing with for a year, tell us a little bit about Norway's strategies and how they might have differed from some of the other countries and what that has meant for you.
Yeah, I think one of the major differences between Norway and at least a lot of other countries is the fact that we have had a really open dialogue between the population and our health authorities.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have excelled with respect to particularly displaying the insecurity that is there, both how they feel we should progress, but also what data is available, what data is not available, to kind of offer an insight into how strong the foundation, the scientific foundation for the different decisions are.
Yeah.
I think to communicate that insecurity very clearly, that increases the trust that we have in our health authorities. Yeah. Thereby also our government that will follow these scientific advices, although not completely. And that is also one of the things that I think may distinguish Norway from other countries, because we have certainly scientific advices as a basis for what we decide to do, but there is still a political element that's also brought into the decision making. And so that interplay, I think that dialogue, which has been fairly open, will also make it easier to understand the priorities and the perspectives that have been brought into the different decisions. Should we close down? Should we not? What's the arguments for our economy, for health, and so forth? We have had a discussion on that interplay. And I think that really is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, trust is obviously the foundation of all of this, and that increased communication helps to facilitate that trust at every level. How do you feel the exhausted part of the community with now this has been going on for almost a year, and of course we're having new shutdowns and increased incidents of mutations and breakouts or outbreaks in smaller areas? So do you think that trust and communication will continue, or will we see a wax and wane based upon the exhaustion of the public?
I think that trust and that open communication is why the public is still actually trusting our health authorities and government and their decisions. Yeah. In the absence of that, why should we? We're all exhausted. This goes up and down. It's hard to explain. There's a lot of frustration, and that makes sense. Yeah. But that dialogue, I think, is key in order to maintain the necessary strategies that we are. When we have to close down Oslo, we have to close it down, and people understand that. Yeah. Because of that dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as you said, sort of the next step in this is that we have to have increased preparedness at all times, not only for COVID, but for the fact that we will have future pandemics. Is there anything you want to say about that part?
Yeah, well, I hope we will get back to society as normal well before we have to deal with the next pandemic. Yeah. But I think maybe this has brought awareness into society that we should always be prepared. But I hope it will not affect the daily life as much as it does now for the future. We have to also make sure that we learn from this, so that next time a pandemic hits, maybe we can avoid a lot of the negative side effects that we this time had to suffer.
Yeah.
Maybe the vaccine development really works, but it was based on a guess as to what would constitute the most relevant correlative protection, the most relevant type of immune response. It was a guess. It was based on knowledge, but it was still a guess. It worked.
Yep.
That's great. So we have to make sure it works the next time as well. And that means we have to also learn more about viruses.
Yeah, so this is a really nice segue back into what I thought would have been one of my earlier questions, was reverting to, what incentivized us to create this COVID 50-50 task force, which was in part based upon the Women in Global Health 5 asks. So you, of course, have reviewed the 5 asks, and I'm really interested to hear what your feeling towards the 5 asks are and where you feel they most relate to your current, both professional and personal experiences.
Yeah, I think the first and the fourth would be of particular importance directly from my work. The first one for me personally, in that I'm actually a part of both the information system, partially also the formal advice system of the country, and I think it's important to emphasize that females, not only myself, but several others, have been very visible in Norway in all of these tasks. So that I think that is good. For me, the fourth ask is particularly relevant as a scientist, because we are starting to see more that biological sex actually means that immune responses are differently formed depending on your sex, which is interesting. We have estrogens, we have testosterone, and we have a lot of other factors that will shape immune responses. And we see now during COVID-19 that males, elder males, have an increased probability of suffering severe disease and death as opposed to women. And that makes sense, actually, because when you look at the science, women have often a stronger ability to form protective antibodies and T-cell responses, which are the two main immune responses that will protect us against disease. On the flip side of the coin, we also have an increased ability to get autoimmune disease, which is not that great. So there are pros and cons for both of the sexes here, but to understand how that is regulated and how immune responses are different, actually, also as a cause of biological sex, will be important for my research, because for the future, I hope we can develop even better vaccines, and vaccines that are more tailor-made to a particular group or individual. And then that factor will be important to consider specifically.
Okay, so this is a bit of an unexpected question, but now you've got me curious. So I'm going to throw in one extra here. So in this particular type of research, I mean, obviously you're taking a look at immune responses and underlying potential autoimmune factors, but we've also seen that, for example, those who have a history of any sort of cardiovascular disease, stroke, that they tend to be impacted disproportionately. And of course, as we know, that also tends to disproportionately impact males. So are there metabolic factors that are being investigated here, as well as immune factors? And to what degree, for example, are we looking at, for example, body composition, visceral fat, and how those things might impact your response to something like COVID?
Yeah, that's not a part of my research, but yes, it's also being looked at. Both, as you say, metabolic factors, also how life factors will influence. There's a disproportion as to who smokes, who is obese, and so forth. All of these things come into play. And as you probably know, cardiac arrest is particularly a mystery still in women as compared to men. And eventually, I'm a female. I would like the medical treatment that I need to be updated and be specific for me, or at least work in me, which for many of the treatments available, we actually don't really have good data on.
No,
So that's kind of beyond my own subject,
Yeah.
but yes,
Yeah. But
it's
when we
totally
talk about
relevant.
maybe you could speak to where you think women, I mean, if we're taking out the biological component of it, where else do you think we might see a disproportionate impact on women?
In a lot of different areas. Well, in Norway we are fairly equal, but still there are indications that women are taking on a higher workload of the responsibilities at home. Yeah. And at present, with the COVID-19 forcing a lot of people to home offices, for some people that means taking care of children if the kindergarten is closed during your workday while trying to work. And well, there's a lot of added work that is invisible and that we really don't know enough about how is distributed. So that is certainly something that we should find out. And for people, for researchers in psychology, what is the difference after this pandemic in terms of how many people are exhausted or not exhausted? Has this had a different financial impact on genders? Are women or males more prone or less prone to be unemployed at present? There are so many factors that are facet and are often difficult to identify, I think, that will separate the gender perspectives at present particularly.
If you were to look both at your professional and your personal experiences related to COVID and beyond, what advice would you offer women, given what you know today?
Well, I think it's important, particularly for women, to seek risk. Well, not in the sense that I'm going to suggest risk behavior anyway, but there is this thing, and I experienced that personally. I think, yeah, in my when I was a teenager and early 20s, sometimes you would get questions as to if you were interested in participating with that task or if you would, accept responsibilities. And I thought on several occasions that, yeah, it would be good, but I don't think I'm too qualified. Probably someone can do it better. And I said no on several occasions. And then what I observed, as I'm sure many other women have observed, is that some male said yes. And when they did the work, I was thinking, oh my God, I could have done that so much better. So, that taught me to say yes when I'm offered the possibility of taking a chance, taking a leap. And that is something that I would certainly suggest that other women do too. It's fun, and usually what you find when you throw yourself off a cliff is that you actually can fly. Sometimes you fall, but well, then you fall. If you look at the situation in science right now, it's very visible. In my own scientific discipline, there is a huge overweight of women during the studies. There is a huge dominance of women during PhD studies, during postdoc studies, but certainly not beyond.
Yeah,
that's where it stops.
Yeah.
What happens? Nobody really has the answer to that, but something happens. We should really find out what happens there, or encourage women to take a leap, jump off a cliff, not literally.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, then I would very much love to invite you to join us as a member of Women in Global Health, because I think when it comes to women supporting other women within this field and being able to identify growth opportunities and expand their network and really gain the mentorship to be able to understand that they can fly, I think you would provide a great viewpoint on all aspects of that. I want to thank you very much today. I think that this has been very enlightening. I think that our viewers are going to get a lot from this. Thank you.
Thank you.